On that note, it's interesting. We keep hearing that the mainstream media, the viewing figures across, the main traditional networks are down. I believe, CNN's ratings are much lower than they used to be. Fox, MSNBC. Do you think the traditional legacy media can it survive in the new media landscape?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's a slow death.
Right.
I mean, if you take, just to refresh this conversation a little, maybe if we take sport, um, you know, I'm looking for the golf this morning. I'm not watching on NBC or CBS. I'm watching it on an app.
Mm.
And then on that app, I can watch six different matches at the same time.
Yeah.
I can watch Rory McIlroy on the 10th, and I can watch, Wyndham Clark on the 15th, and I can both have them on the split screen. So I think the visual medium is moving towards, apps,
Yep.
derivatives, Netflix and movies and things like that. Um, that's how people will get their news from there and from social. And then podcasting has kind of forged its own way, kind of beyond radio, kind of radio that you don't have to remember what time it is,
Mm.
but still radio where you can drive the car or make the coffee at the same time,
Yeah.
which you can't do with television. I mean, there are very limited things you can multitask with television, but radio is perfect for the increasing number of multitaskers because it's just
Mm.
there in the background and you're listening to it. And after a while, you don't even realize you're listening to it.
Yeah.
I had a show on last night to fall asleep to, and then I woke up this morning and I couldn't remember whether it was a show or whether it was a dream.
Oh wow. Yeah.
But
It's
I'd sort of
becoming an
drifted
all-consuming.
away.
Yeah, well, we
Yeah,
can. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy. I think that's part of the beauty and the allure of podcasting is you can just always you can either watch them or you can just have them on the side, and there's this always comforting voice or not so comforting depending what you're into, that's there to talk you away.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Um,
the other thing is it used to be that there were journalists and then there was the rest of the world.
right.
I was always very proud of the fact that I was a journalist. Yeah,
Yeah.
one of my first assignments in Liverpool, I was driving into the radio station in Liverpool one morning, and there was a bunch of police cars outside a bank. And I thought, oh, there's something going on here. So I had my new little flashy tape recorder.
Mm.
So I parked up the alleyway and I got out and I found, as you were trained to do, I found the police officer with the biggest number of stripes down his shoulder and the biggest hat on. And I said, "Excuse me, officer, I'm from Radio City. Can you tell me what's happening here?" Very confident.
Yeah.
And he sort of looked down at me after a while. It was a long silence. And he said, "Listen, son, just F off."
Yeah. That's that's a
And
very
so,
scouse way of dealing with it as well.
yeah, I mean, then,
Yeah.
I realized then that, being a journalist wasn't really important in anybody else's eyes. And,
Right.
but now everybody is a journalist, right? You
Yeah.
are, everybody is. Anybody with a microphone, a camera, anybody who can film, anybody who can shoot on phones, we are all journalists. And so that's another nail in the coffin, I think, of the nightly news,
Right.
which is the fact that, people are getting their news now from, thousands of sources and not just the old stalwarts of the old days like Peter Jennings and Tom Brokaw.
Right. Right. Are there any lessons you think that they can learn from new media, the legacy media, if they're to stay relevant, or do you think it's kind of on its way out and we'll move to this new kind of digital model?
I think I think they are trying to learn. I think the fact that they are still profitable is in the way because at the bottom line, as we've seen with what's going on at CBS,
Mm.
in their effort to appease Trump, they are willing to sacrifice their best program,
Right.
60 Minutes, because the president doesn't like it. Um, I think that everything is, with the American networks, they still seem to be predominantly motivated by money. Clearly, the Washington Post is perhaps the last big legacy media that's surviving is the New York Times. And there's a place to look for a model. They are doing more video. They're doing more interactive. They're doing a whole slew of podcasting. The digital model is making money. People are ditching the old paper and signing on for weeks and months of computer subscription, and so I think that transformation is a real model for the others, and not just newspapers, for TV stations as well.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason why, I say to people in podcasting, I say, that script you wrote, that intro you wrote was really good. You know what? That's your show notes. That could be a blog. That could be a
Yeah.
Substack.
Right.
That interview,
Right.
you did with Clark, that could be a blog on your homepage, right? You just need to get the transcript, and transcriptions now are happen like this. All of the
Yeah.
AI models are using them. So
Mm.
I think even the electronic media can move to a kind of a digital world if they have the courage to do it, and if they're prepared to invest to do it.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. You said before that, and it's so true that now anyone with a microphone and a phone can basically be a journalist, and you can potentially reach millions of people. And there's clearly, obviously everything's harder than it looks, but there's great benefit in that. But out of interest, with all your experience and insights, what are the other potential cons to that? I think we're very up on the podcast sphere world right now because it's so popular. But I mean, there's a lot of controversy around, Joe Rogan, and for example, and I mean, he I don't know if you saw this. I don't want to go too deep into it, but he had two people on recently discussing and debating the, Israel-Palestine conflict, and not to go down that route, but the big conversation was, well, one of these people is a journalist, one isn't, and there are guardrails with traditional journalism that don't necessarily exist with podcasting. What are your thoughts on that, and what are the negative consequences potentially to this?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because, well, you with roots in the north of England will have learned probably at school about the Lancashire witches, right?
Rings
Do
a
you remember
bell
that?
vaguely.
The
Yeah.
Lancashire witches and
Mm.
Pendle Hill and all of that. So it's the story of a group of women who lived in the north of England in medieval times who used to try to invent new medicines. So they would try to invent a cure for a cold or something to soothe a wound or something like that. And the elders of the time saw all these potions and decided that these women were witches and they should be hung and drowned. And the rumor spread that these women were witches. And so everybody, all of a sudden there are thousands of people in that neighborhood who all thought that these women were witches, when in effect they were just sort of, women trying to improve the world. And so the
Right.
reason I bring this up is because I think that in some senses, social media is now a reincarnation of that story. You start a rumor and it spreads and it might be absolute nonsense, but the stock exchange starts dropping because of the rumor. Somebody in the political administration seizes on it because it suits them, even though they know it's not true. So when you said there are some guardrails with journalism, that's the problem. That there used to be guardrails for journalists. I took a 1-year master's degree in journalism. I got a certificate from the National Council for the Training of Journalists. I was very, very pleased with it in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I was taught that, if you got your facts wrong, you were out.
Right. Yeah.
But apparently the facts don't really matter anymore. And so that's the danger with just putting this equipment and this power in the hands of people who haven't thought it through, or people who seek to influence it for their own financial or other kind of gain.
Right.
To be a real journalist, you have to be in it just to tell the truth. You have to be in it because you want to you want to inform other people of what's right or what's happening somewhere or an injustice or something.
Yeah.
There can be no other motivation really
Right. Right.
to be a true journalist.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely an opportunity for a lot of bad faith actors and conspiracy theorists to wade on in
Yeah.
this new world, that stuff is very hooky as well. There's something about that kind of grips and grabs our attention more than other things.